The small town of Millbrook, Massachusetts had always been known for its peculiar relationship with death. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the town's cemetery predated most of its buildings. In the autumn of 1887, when the maple trees blazed with fiery colors and the wind carried whispers of the coming winter, 10-year-old Eleanor Blackwood moved to Millbrook with her father, Dr. Thomas Blackwood, a widower who had accepted a position as the town's new physician. Their home, a weathered Victorian structure on Willow Street, stood just half a mile from the cemetery gates. The house had been vacant for nearly a decade before their arrival, its previous owner having left under circumstances that townsfolk seemed reluctant to discuss. "Papa, why does everyone look at our house that way?" Eleanor asked as they unpacked their belongings on their first evening. Her father, a tall man with kind eyes and prematurely graying hair, paused his work. "People in small towns are often wary of newcomers, Ellie," he replied, not meeting her gaze. "They'll warm to us soon enough." Eleanor nodded, though she wasn't convinced. She had noticed how the locals averted their eyes when they walked past their house, how mothers pulled their children closer, how conversations hushed when she and her father entered Caldwell's general store. That night, as a harvest moon hung heavy in the sky, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The house creaked and settled around her, its unfamiliar sounds keeping her awake. From her bedroom window she could see the silhouette of the cemetery's wrought iron gates in the distance, barely visible in the moonlight. As midnight approached, Eleanor noticed a faint bluish glow emanating from among the tombstones. Curiosity overcame caution, and she slipped out of bed, wrapping her woolen shawl around her nightgown. Her father, exhausted from the move, was in a deep sleep down the hall. The night air bit at her skin as she crept out the back door and made her way toward the cemetery. The gates were unlocked than usual, she thought, for a town so concerned with propriety. As she stepped onto the hallowed ground, the bluish glow grew stronger, leading her deeper among the graves. In the oldest section of the cemetery, Eleanor found the source of the light, a small, translucent figure kneeling beside a weathered tombstone. It was a boy, perhaps her age, with hollow eyes and clothes from another time. "Hello," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. The boy turned, surprise evident on his ghostly face. "You can see me?" His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Of course I can," Eleanor replied. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I've been dead for 70 years, the boy said matter-of-factly. "My name is William Porter." Eleanor should have been frightened, but strangely, she wasn't. Perhaps it was the boy's forlorn expression, or perhaps it was the loneliness she herself had felt since her mother's death 2 years prior. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood. We just moved into the house on Willow Street." William's expression darkened. "The Thorn House?" "I suppose that was the name of the previous owners," Eleanor said. "You shouldn't be there," William warned, his form flickering like a candle flame in a draft. "That house, ... it sees things. Knows things." Before Eleanor could ask what he meant, a church bell tolled in the distance, signaling 1 o'clock. William looked alarmed. "You must go," he urged. "It's not safe here after the hour, but come tomorrow night if you can. There's something you need to know about your house, ... about Millbrook." With that, William's form dissipated like mist, leaving Eleanor alone among the tombstones. As she turned to leave, she noticed something carved into the base of a nearby mausoleum, partially obscured by moss. "Beware the thorn legacy, for it blooms with blood." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine as she hurried home, slipping back inside just as her father stirred in his sleep. As she lay in bed, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the house was somehow listening, somehow aware of where she had been and whom she had met. Outside her window, the wind picked up, rattling the glass panes like skeletal fingers demanding entry. The following morning, Eleanor joined her father for breakfast, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying her midnight adventure. "Did you not sleep well, Ellie?" Dr. Blackwood asked, concern etching lines into his forehead. "The house makes strange noises," she replied, not untruthfully. Her father smiled sympathetically. "All houses have their own language. You'll grow accustomed to it." After breakfast, Eleanor ventured into town while her father organized his new medical practice. She found herself drawn to the small library, a brick building with arched windows and the musty scent of old books. Inside, a stern-faced librarian with spectacles perched on her nose watched Eleanor with unconcealed suspicion. "Good morning," Eleanor said politely. "I was wondering if you have any books about the history of Millbrook." The librarian's eyes narrowed. "What's your interest in our history, child?" "My father and I just moved here. I thought it would be nice to learn about our new home." After a moment's hesitation, the librarian directed her to a shelf in the back. "Town records and histories are there. Mind you don't disturb the organization." Eleanor thanked her and began to search. Among dusty volumes of tax records and town meeting minutes, She found a thin book bound in faded green leather. Millbrook, A History of Shadowed Valleys by Jeremiah Caldwell. Dated 1867. She opened it carefully, the spine cracking with age. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the text was legible. Eleanor skimmed through accounts of the town's founding in 1742 until a chapter heading caught her eye: The Thorne Family and the Winter of Weeping. According to the book, the Thornes were among Millbrook's founding families. Wealthy landowners who built the house on Willow Street in 1750. Jonathan Thorne, the family patriarch, was described as a man of science with interests that extended beyond the veil of mortality. The chapter spoke vaguely of experiments conducted in the house's cellar and of townsfolk who disappeared during the harsh winter of 1762. When Eleanor turned the page, she found that several pages had been carefully cut out of the book. The narrative jumped from 1762 to 1780, with no explanation of what had occurred in between. Find what you were looking for? The librarian's voice startled Eleanor. Some of the pages are missing, Eleanor said, showing the woman the gap in the book. The librarian's face paled slightly. That book is very old. Pages get damaged, removed. Perhaps you should try a different volume. But Eleanor's curiosity was piqued. Do you know anything about the Thorne family? They owned our house before we did. The Thornes left Millbrook long ago, the librarian said tersely. And some stories are best left buried, Miss Blackwood. Eleanor was startled. How do you know my name? This is a small town, the woman replied, taking the book from Eleanor's hands. We know who comes and goes. Now, I think it's time you headed home. These old books are full of dust. Not good for young lungs. Reluctantly, Eleanor left the library, her mind swimming with questions. As she walked home, she passed Millbrook Cemetery and paused at its gates. In the daylight, it seemed peaceful enough, a quiet field of weathered stones and ancient trees. But Eleanor remembered William's warning and the ominous carving on the mausoleum. When she returned home, she found her father in the parlor, looking troubled. Is everything all right, Papa? She asked, and he forced a smile. Yes, of course. Just sorting through some peculiar medical records left by my predecessor. He closed the folder he'd been examining. How was your exploration of the town? Interesting, Eleanor said carefully. Papa, do you know anything about the family that lived here before us? The Thornes? Her father's expression changed subtly, tightening around the eyes that Eleanor recognized as discomfort. Only that they left rather suddenly. Why do you ask? No reason, Eleanor lied. Just something someone mentioned in town. As evening approached, Eleanor felt a growing anticipation. She needed to speak with William again, to learn what he knew about the house and the Thorne family. But her father seemed unusually attentive that night, checking on her repeatedly until she finally pretended to fall asleep. When the house grew quiet and the grandfather clock in the hall struck 11, Eleanor slipped out of bed and began to prepare for another midnight visit to the cemetery, unaware that eyes watched her from the shadowed corner of her room, eyes that belonged to neither the living nor the dead, but to something that had dwelled in the walls of the Thorne house for over a century. As midnight approached, Eleanor carefully made her way down the creaking staircase, wincing at each sound. The house seemed different at night, the shadows deeper, the halls longer, the air heavier with a scent like damp earth, and something metallic she couldn't quite place. Just as she reached for the back door, a floorboard groaned behind her. Eleanor froze. Ellie? Her father's voice was thick with sleep. What are you doing up at this hour? Eleanor turned, mind racing for an excuse. I was thirsty, Papa. Just getting some water. Dr. Blackwood studied her face in the dim light. Something in his expression suggested he didn't quite believe her, but he nodded toward the kitchen. Well, get your water and back to bed. It's far too late for little girls to be wandering about. Under her father's watchful eye, Eleanor was forced to abandon her plan to meet William. She returned to her room, disappointment heavy in her chest. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial, that time was somehow running out. When she finally drifted to sleep, her dreams were vivid and disturbing. She saw William standing among the graves, his translucent form gradually fading as a dark shadow crept toward him from the direction of her house. She saw the library book with its missing pages floating in a sea of red, and she saw a man in old-fashioned clothes bent over a table in what looked like their cellar, working frantically as muffled cries echoed from a corner hidden in shadow. Eleanor woke with a start just before dawn, her nightgown damp with sweat. Outside her window, a crow perched on a bare branch, its black eyes fixed on her with unnerving intelligence. At breakfast, her father announced that he would be making house calls in the countryside and wouldn't return until evening. Will you be all right on your own, Ellie? He asked. Mrs. Hargrove from next door has agreed to check on you at midday. Eleanor assured him she would be fine. As soon as he left, she decided to use her solitude to investigate the house itself. If she couldn't get answers from William yet, perhaps the house would reveal some of its secrets. She started in the attic, a dusty space filled with trunks and furniture left by previous owners. Most contained nothing of interest: old clothes, tarnished silverware, faded photographs of stern-faced people she didn't recognize, but in a small wooden box tucked behind a broken rocking chair, Eleanor found a journal bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. The inside cover bore the name Abigail Thorne and a date, 1761. The handwriting was delicate and precise, though many entries were short and seemed mundane at first: accounts of social calls, household management, and town gossip. But as Eleanor read further, the entries took a darker turn. November 17th, 1761. Jonathan spent the entire night in the cellar again. The sounds that come from below are not natural. When I asked him about his work, he said only that he was reaching beyond the veil. I fear for his soul. December 3rd, 1761. Another disappearance in town. Young Peter Simmons has not been seen for 3 days. The townsfolk whisper of wolves, but I have seen no wolf tracks near our property. Only Jonathan's boots, muddied in the early morning hours. December 21st, 1761, the winter solstice. Jonathan insisted on having the Bennett child visit. I objected. The poor boy is simple-minded and has no family to miss him, but Jonathan was adamant. The screams from the cellar lasted only minutes, but I shall hear them for eternity. God forgive us for what happens in this house. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned to the next page, but found only blank paper. The entries stopped abruptly, leaving her with more questions than answers. As she returned the journal to its hiding place, Eleanor heard a sound from below, a soft thud, as if something had fallen. She froze, listening intently. Her father shouldn't be home yet, and Mrs. Hargrove wasn't due for hours. Gathering her courage, Eleanor descended the attic stairs and checked each room on the second floor. Finding nothing amiss, she continued down to the main level. The sound seemed to have come from below, from the cellar. The cellar door, located off the kitchen, was always kept locked. Her father had claimed it was for her safety, as the stairs were old and potentially dangerous. But Eleanor had noticed how he had avoided the cellar entirely since their arrival, never even mentioning what might be stored there. To her surprise, the cellar door now stood slightly ajar, a cool draft emanating from the darkness beyond. Heart pounding, Eleanor approached the door and pulled it open wider. Stone steps descended into blackness. She retrieved a lantern from the kitchen, lit it with shaking hands, and began her descent. Each step feeling like a movement toward some terrible truth she wasn't sure she wanted to discover. The cellar was larger than she expected, extending beyond the footprint of the house above. The walls were rough stone, the floor packed earth in some places and flagstone in others. Eleanor's lantern cast long, dancing shadows as she moved deeper into the space. In the center of the cellar stood a large stone table, its surface stained with dark patches that Eleanor didn't want to examine too closely. Around it, shelves lined the walls, holding jars of murky liquid with shapes floating within. Books bound in materials she couldn't identify, and instruments of brass and iron whose purposes she couldn't fathom. But what drew her attention was a section of the wall behind the table. Unlike the rough stone surrounding it, this portion appeared to have been sealed with newer bricks, the mortar still somewhat lighter in color. And at the base of this wall, something glinted in the lantern light, a small, tarnished locket. As Eleanor bent to pick it up, she heard a sound that stopped her heart, the cellar door slamming shut above her, followed by the distinct click of a lock. For a moment, Eleanor stood frozen in the darkness, the lantern trembling in her grip. Then she rushed to the stairs, climbing them 2 at a time until she reached the door. She pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. "Hello?" she called, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Mrs. Hargrove? Is anyone there?" No answer came. Eleanor pressed her ear to the wood, but heard nothing beyond no footsteps. No breathing, no indication of who might have locked her in. With no choice but to wait for rescue, Eleanor returned to the cellar floor. She placed the lantern on the stone table and examined the locket she'd found. It was oval-shaped with intricate engravings of roses and thorns, a macabre play on the family name, she supposed. When she managed to pry it open, she found a miniature portrait inside, a solemn-faced boy with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed too old for his young face. The resemblance to William Porter was unmistakable. "That's not possible," Eleanor whispered to herself. William had said he died 70 years ago, around 1817, but the locket and the journal dated to the 1760s. How could William's portrait be in a locket from before he was born? Unless, Eleanor realized with a chill, the boy she'd met in the cemetery wasn't William Porter at all. A scratching sound drew her attention to the bricked-up section of wall. At first, Eleanor thought it might be mice, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause, like fingernails on stone. Against every instinct telling her to stay away, Eleanor approached the wall. "Hello?" she whispered, feeling foolish and frightened in equal measure. "Is someone there?" The scratching stopped abruptly. Then, so faintly she almost missed it, came a voice from within the wall. "Help us!" Eleanor stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. The voice had been a child's, high-pitched, desperate, and eerily similar to William's. Before she could respond, the cellar door creaked open upstairs. "Eleanor?" It was her father's voice, tight with concern. "Are you down there?" Relief flooded through her. "Papa." "Yes, I'm here." The door locked behind me somehow. Dr. Blackwood descended the stairs, his face pale in the lantern light. "What are you doing down here?" "I expressly forbade you from entering the cellar." "I heard a noise," Eleanor explained, deciding not to mention the journal or the locket, which she had quickly pocketed. "The door was open, and I thought perhaps someone had broken in." Her father looked skeptical but didn't press the issue. "Well, you're safe now. Though I must say, Ellie, you seem determined to explore every forbidden corner since our arrival." He glanced around the cellar with obvious discomfort. "Come upstairs. This place isn't healthy. Too much dampness and mold." As they ascended the stairs, Eleanor couldn't resist one last question. "Papa, why was this part of the cellar walled up?" She pointed to the newer brickwork. Dr. Blackwood hesitated, his hand tightening on the railing. "Structural issues, I imagine. Old houses often need such repairs." He ushered her through the door. "Now, no more talk of cellars and walls. I've brought home some fresh bread from town and a jar of Mrs. Hargrove's apple preserves for our lunch." That afternoon, Eleanor tried to put the cellar incident out of her mind, but the voice behind the wall haunted her. "Help us. Not help me, but help us." How many were there? And how had they come to be sealed within the wall of her home? As dusk fell, Eleanor made her decision. She would meet William or whoever he truly was at the cemetery tonight and demand answers. But first, she needed to ensure her father wouldn't interrupt her again. "Papa," she said as they finished dinner, "I'm awfully tired tonight. I think I'll go to bed early." Dr. Blackwood looked relieved. "That's probably wise after your adventure today. A good night's sleep will set everything right." In her room, Eleanor didn't undress for bed. Instead, she sat fully clothed by her window, watching as lights went out across Millbrook and her father eventually retired to his own room. When the grandfather clock struck 11:30, she quietly made her way downstairs and out the back door. The night was cloudy, with no moon to light her path, but Eleanor had memorized the way to the cemetery. As she approached its gates, she saw the now familiar blue glow among the tombstones. William, or whatever he was waiting. "You came back," the spectral boy said as she approached. He looked more substantial tonight, less like mist and more like a boy made of pale blue light. "I need answers," Eleanor said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "You're not William Porter, are you?" The boy's expression didn't change. "I am now, but before that I was someone else." "We all were." "What do you mean, we?" "The children of the wall," he replied. "Those of us who met Jonathan Thorne." Eleanor pulled the locket from her pocket. "Is this you? Before you were William?" The ghost boy reached for it, his fingers passing through the metal. "Benjamin Bennett," he whispered. "That was my name then. In 1761. The Bennett child," Eleanor breathed, remembering the journal entry. "What did Jonathan Thorne do to you?" William Benjamin's form flickered, distress evident in his features. He sought to bridge the gap between life and death. He believed children were more receptive to the process, more malleable. He took us orphans, the simple-minded, those who wouldn't be missed down to his cellar. There was a table, and knives, and words in a language I didn't know. Eleanor felt sick. "He killed you. Death would have been kinder," the boy said. "He trapped us between worlds. Our bodies died, but our spirits remained bound to him, to his bloodline, to the house. When he realized the townsfolk were growing suspicious, he sealed our remains in the wall. Over the years, we learned to project ourselves beyond the house, to appear as other lost children. Sometimes we can even borrow the identities of the recently deceased, like young William Porter, but why? Why would he do such a terrible thing? Power, knowledge, the ability to command the dead." William's form began to fade. "But that's not why I called you here, Eleanor. I needed to warn you. You're in danger." "From whom?" "From your father," William said, his voice growing fainter. "Thomas Blackwood isn't your father. The man who brought you to Millbrook is Jonathan Thorne." Eleanor felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. That's not possible. Jonathan Thorne would be over 150 years old. His original body died long ago, William explained, now barely visible. But he found a way to transfer his consciousness, moving from body to body down through the generations, always seeking the right child to complete his work. Children like you, Eleanor. Children with the gift to see the dead. As the church bell began to toll midnight, William's form dissipated entirely, his final words hanging in the air. He's coming for you tonight. Run, Eleanor. Run far from Millbrook. Eleanor stood frozen among the graves, William's warning echoing in her mind. It couldn't be true. Her father, the kind man who had read her bedtime stories, who had held her while she cried after her mother's death, who had always protected her, couldn't be Jonathan Thorne, a monster who experimented on children. And yet, certain details began to align in her mind. How her father had seemed so eager to move to Millbrook, to this specific house, how he'd forbidden her from entering the cellar, how he'd appeared so quickly after she'd heard the voice behind the wall, despite claiming he'd be gone until evening. A distant roll of thunder broke Eleanor's paralysis. She had to get away, at least until she could determine the truth. But where could she go in a town full of strangers, many of whom seemed wary of her very presence? The church. It stood on the far side of the cemetery, its steeple rising like a sentinel against the gathering storm clouds. Perhaps the minister would help her, or at least provide sanctuary until morning. Eleanor ran through the cemetery, her footsteps muffled by the damp grass. Behind her, she thought she heard something moving among the tombstones, not the sound of human footsteps, but a slithering, dragging noise that raised the hairs on the back of her neck. The church was a small, white-clappered building with a single stained glass window above its doors. Eleanor reached for the handle, praying it would be unlocked. To her relief, the door swung open, and she slipped inside, closing it firmly behind her. The interior was dark, save for a few candles burning near the altar. The smell of beeswax and old hymenals filled the air. Eleanor moved quietly down the center aisle, hoping to find a vestry or office where the minister might be working late. "Hello?" she called softly. "Is anyone here? Please, I need help." A rustling sound came from behind the altar. Eleanor approached cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. A figure rose from where it had been kneeling in prayer, an elderly man with white hair and kind, albeit startled, eyes. "Child, what are you doing in the house of God at this hour?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir," Eleanor said, fighting back tears of relief. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood. My father and I recently moved to the Thorne house," the minister finished for her, his expression grown grave. "Yes, I know who you are, child. The whole town has spoken of little else since your arrival. Please, I need your help," Eleanor continued. "I believe I'm in danger. My father, I think he might not be who he claims to be." The minister studied her face for a long moment, then gestured toward a small door beside the altar. "Come, we can speak more privately in my study." Eleanor followed him into a cramped room lined with bookshelves. A desk occupied one corner, covered with papers and an open Bible. The minister lit an oil lamp, casting the room in a warm glow, then motioned for Eleanor to take a seat. "Now," he said, settling into his own chair, "tell me what has frightened you so." Eleanor hesitated, aware of how fantastical her story would sound, but the minister's patient expression gave her courage. She told him everything about William Benjamin, about the journal and the locket, about the voices behind the wall and William's warning about her father. Throughout her account, the minister's face remained impassive, though his eyes grew increasingly troubled. When she finished, he sat in silence for several moments, his fingers steepled before him. "Eleanor," he finally said, "what I am about to tell you may be difficult to hear, but I believe you are old enough to bear the truth. The history of Millbrook is stained with blood, particularly the history of the Thorne family." He rose and retrieved a book from his shelf, a volume identical to the one Eleanor had found in the library, but intact, with no missing pages. "Jeremiah Caldwell was my great-grandfather," the minister explained. "He documented the darkest chapter of our town's history, though many have sought to bury it." He opened the book to the section about the Thornes. The pages removed from the library copy contained details of Jonathan Thorne's experiments and the disappearances that followed. When the townsfolk finally realized what was happening, they stormed the Thorne house, only to find Jonathan and his wife dead apparent suicides, and no trace of the missing children. "But they were there all along," Eleanor whispered, "behind the wall." The minister nodded grimly. "So it would seem. But there's more. Every few decades since then, someone has moved into the Thorne house. Always a man of science or medicine, always with a child in tow. And always within a year of their arrival, children in Millbrook begin to disappear." Eleanor felt cold despite the warm room. "And no one tried to stop it?" No one warned us? Some tried, the minister said, but those who spoke too loudly often met with accidents. Over time, the town learned to look away, to pretend not to notice. It was easier than facing the horror in their midst. He looked ashamed. I myself have been guilty of such cowardice. When I heard a doctor and his daughter had moved into the Thorn house, I should have come to you immediately. It's not too late, Eleanor said, a desperate hope rising within her. We can stop him now, before he takes any more children. The minister looked uncertain. Jonathan Thorn, if that is indeed who possesses your father's body, is powerful and dangerous. We would need help, evidence. The cellar, Eleanor said. Everything we need to prove what he's done is in that cellar. A crash of thunder shook the small church, followed by the sudden drumming of rain on the roof. The minister moved to the window, peering out into the storm. No one will help us tonight, not in this weather, he said. You must stay here until morning. Then we can go to the sheriff with what we know. Eleanor nodded, relief washing over her at the thought of not having to return to the house tonight. But as the minister turned back from the window, the study door burst open. Doctor. Thomas Blackwood stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes unnaturally bright in the lamplight. There you are, Ellie, he said, his voice oddly calm. I've been so worried. When I found your bed empty, I feared the worst. Stay back, the minister warned, moving to stand between Eleanor and her father. I know what you are, Thorn. Dr. Blackwood's face remained pleasant, though something cold entered his eyes. I'm afraid you're confused, Reverend Wilson. I'm simply a father concerned for his daughter, who has apparently been filling your head with disturbing fantasies. He extended his hand toward Eleanor. Come, Ellie, it's time to go home. Eleanor pressed back against the wall, shaking her head. You're not my father. My father wouldn't hurt children. He wouldn't seal them in walls. Something shifted in Dr. Blackwood's expression, a subtle change that made him suddenly seem like a stranger wearing a familiar face. Clever girl, he said, his voice deeper now with an accent that hadn't been there before. I always knew you were special, even before your mother's unfortunate passing. The minister reached for a letter opener on his desk, brandishing it like a weapon. Leave this child alone, demon. Dr. Blackwood, or the entity controlling him, laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. Your faith is admirable, Reverend, but misplaced. I am no demon, merely a man who has transcended the limitations of mortality. He took a step forward. And I have waited far too long to complete my work to be thwarted now. As Eleanor watched in horror, her father's body began to change. His skin grew taut over his bones, his eyes sank deeper into their sockets, and his hands elongated, the fingers becoming more like claws. It was as if the mask of Thomas Blackwood was slipping, revealing glimpses of something ancient and terrible beneath. Let's run, child, the minister shouted, lunging at the transformed figure with his makeshift weapon. Eleanor didn't wait to see what happened next. She darted past the struggling men and through the church, the sound of the minister's scream following her into the storm-lashed night. Rain pelted Eleanor's face as she ran blindly through the cemetery, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. Behind her, the church door slammed open, followed by an inhuman howl that cut through the storm's fury. He was coming. Eleanor had no plan beyond escape, no destination save away from the thing wearing her father's skin. But in her panic, she found herself following a familiar path, the route to the Thorn house. To home. Not home, she reminded herself. Never home. And yet, where else could she go? The townspeople had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with the Blackwoods. And now she understood why they had recognized Jonathan Thorn's return, had known what it portended, and had chosen to look away rather than confront the evil in their midst. The house loomed ahead, dark against the turbulent sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating its gabled roof and shuttered windows. For an instant, Eleanor thought she saw faces pressed against the glass, small, pale faces with hollow eyes. She hesitated at the gate, torn between the terror behind her and the horror that waited within. Then, in a flash of clarity, she realized the answers she needed were inside that house. The proof of Jonathan Thorn's crimes, the remains of his victims. If she could somehow expose what lay behind the bricked-up wall in the cellar, perhaps she could end Thorn's reign of terror once and for all. Decision made, Eleanor pushed through the gate and approached the house. The back door was unlocked. Of course it was. Thorn had left in haste to pursue her. She slipped inside, water pooling around her feet on the kitchen floor. The house felt different now, alive somehow, pulsing with malevolent energy. The walls seemed to breathe, the floorboards creaking rhythmically like a massive heartbeat. Eleanor stood still, listening not just with her ears, but with some deeper sense she hadn't known she possessed. They're here, she realized. All of them. Their spirits bound to this place, trapped between worlds. "I know you're there," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "The children and the wall. I want to help you." A coldness swept through the room, raising goosebumps on Eleanor's arms. The flame in the oil lamp on the table flickered wildly, then steadied, burning with an unnatural blue light. "Cellar," a chorus of voices seemed to whisper, though Eleanor couldn't tell if she heard them with her ears or in her mind. "Free us." The cellar door creaked open of its own accord, revealing the stone steps descending into darkness. Eleanor took a deep breath and followed the blue light down into the earth. The cellar looked different now. The stone table at its center seemed to glow faintly, symbols carved into its surface that Eleanor hadn't noticed before. The jars on the shelves rattled slightly, their contents shifting as if awakening from a long slumber. But it was the bricked-up wall that drew Eleanor's attention. In the blue light, she could now see what had been invisible before. Faint outlines of hands pressed against the bricks from within, as if the wall itself had become semi-transparent. "How do I free you?" Eleanor asked, approaching the wall. "His tools," the voices replied. "Break the bonds." Eleanor searched the shelves, finding strange instruments whose purposes she could only guess at. One caught her eye, a curved knife with symbols etched into its blade that matched those on the stone table. As she lifted it, the knife hummed in her hand, vibrating with power. A crash from upstairs told her that time was running out. Thorn had returned. Guided by instinct, Eleanor approached the wall and pressed the knife against the mortar between the bricks. As the knife touched the mortar, it began to crumble away like sand, the bricks loosening without Eleanor having to apply any pressure. She stepped back, watching in astonishment as the wall began to dismantle itself brick by brick, each one falling away with barely a sound. Behind the wall was a small chamber, and within it Leonard stifled a scream. The remains of at least a dozen children were arranged in a perfect circle, their bones yellowed with age but preserved in the dry air of the sealed chamber. Each skeleton was bound with copper wire twisted into strange symbols, and at the center of the circle lay a book bound in what looked horribly like human skin. "The grimoire," the voices whispered. "His power. Destroy it." Heavy footsteps creaked across the floor above, followed by the sound of the kitchen door slamming open. Jonathan Thorn, in the body of Eleanor's father, was searching the house. With shaking hands, Eleanor reached for the book. The moment her fingers touched its cover, visions flooded her mind, centuries of horror, of children led to slaughter, of a consciousness moving from body to body like a parasite, leaving only husks behind. She saw her real father's final moments, felt his confusion and terror as Jonathan Thorn's spirit invaded his mind, pushing him aside until nothing remained but a shell for Thorn to wear. Eleanor. The roar from upstairs was barely human, filled with rage and desperation. The cellar door burst open, and heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Eleanor clutched the grimoire to her chest and backed away from the chamber, her eyes fixed on the grotesque figure that had once been her father. In the blue light of the cellar, Jonathan Thorn was fully revealed. Though he still wore Thomas Blackwood's body, the resemblance to her father was now minimal. The skin had stretched tight across the skull, the eyes sunken and glowing with an unholy light. His mouth had widened unnaturally, revealing too many teeth, sharp and yellowed. "Step away from my work, child," he commanded, his voice a grating rasp that bore no resemblance to her father's gentle tones. "They were children," Eleanor said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Like me. You murdered them." "Murdered?" Thorn laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "I elevated them, transformed them. They became my anchors to this world, my tethers across centuries." He extended a hand that had elongated into claw-like fingers. "The book, Eleanor. Give it to me and I'll show you wonders beyond your imagining." "You killed my father," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "You've been pretending all this time." Something like regret flickered across the monstrous face. "Your father was weak. He didn't appreciate your gift, the ability to see beyond the veil. But I recognized it immediately. Why do you think I chose him? I needed to get close to you." He took a step forward. "You are the key, Eleanor. The final piece. With you, my work can be completed." Eleanor clutched the book tighter. "What work? What are you trying to do?" "Immortality without dependency," Thorn explained, his eyes gleaming. "For centuries I've had to move from body to body, seeking suitable vessels. But with the right child, a child who can communicate with the dead, I can build a body of my own. A perfect form that will never age, never die." He gestured toward the stone table. "It was to be my gift to you as well. Father and daughter transcending death together. Imagine it, Eleanor's centuries of knowledge, of discovery, of power." For a moment, Eleanor felt a strange pull, a temptation in his words. To never die, to learn the secrets of the universe. But then she looked at the circle of small skeletons at the price of Thorne's ambition, and her resolve hardened. "You're not my father," she said, "and I will never help you." With sudden decision, Eleanor turned and ran toward the stone table. Before Thorne could reach her, she slammed the grimoire down on its surface, directly atop the carved symbols. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The symbols on the table blazed with blue fire, which quickly spread to engulf the book. Thorne screamed, a sound of pure anguish and rage, and lunged for Eleanor, but an invisible force held him back. As the grimoire burned with supernatural flames, the copper bindings on the children's remains began to glow, then to melt. One by one, small, translucent figures appeared around the chamber, the spirits of Jonathan Thorne's victims, no longer bound by his dark magic. "No," Thorne howled, his body beginning to wither before Eleanor's eyes, the stolen vitality that had sustained him for centuries draining away. "What have you done?" "Freed them," Eleanor said simply. "And my father too, I hope." The spectral children moved toward Thorne, their faces no longer sad but resolute. As they surrounded him, his body, her father's body, crumpled to the ground, aging decades and seconds, the skin desiccating, the eyes dulling. With a final rattling breath, Jonathan Thorne's centuries-long existence came to an end. In the silence that followed, Eleanor felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned to find William Benjamin standing beside her, more solid now than she had ever seen him. "Thank you," he said, his voice clear and strong. "We can rest now." One by one, the spirits of the children faded, not into nothingness, but into a warm, golden light that seemed to emanate from somewhere beyond the cellar walls. Benjamin was the last to go. "Your father waits for you," he told Eleanor. "Not here, but somewhere safe. You'll find him again someday." He smiled, a real smile, free from the sadness that had marked his spectral features before. "But not too soon, I hope." With that, he too dissolved into the golden light, leaving Eleanor alone in the cellar with the withered corpse of what had once appeared to be her father, and the smoldering remains of Jonathan Thorne's grimoire. Dawn broke over Millbrook, pale light filtering through the storm clouds that were now retreating to the east. Eleanor sat on the back steps of the Thorne house, wrapped in a blanket she'd found upstairs, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. As the first rays of sunlight touched the weathered shingles of the house, a group of townsfolk appeared at the gate, led by Sheriff Harlow, a stern-faced man with a thick mustache. Behind him stood several men carrying rifles, and behind them a larger crowd of curious onlookers. "Miss Blackwood," the sheriff called, approaching cautiously. "Reverend Wilson sent us. Said there was trouble here." Eleanor nodded wearily. The Reverend was right. "You'll find what's left of Jonathan Thorne in the cellar, along with proof of his crimes." The sheriff's eyes widened. "Jonathan Thorne? But that's not possible. He died over a century ago." "Not exactly," Eleanor said. "And I think deep down you all knew that. The town has been protecting his secret for generations, looking the other way while children disappeared." A murmur ran through the crowd, some faces showing shame, others defiance. "And your father?" the sheriff asked. "Dr. Blackwood?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, still stained with ash from the grimoire. "That wasn't my father. It was Jonathan Thorne wearing his skin. My real father died long before we came to Millbrook." The sheriff signaled to his deputies, and they entered the house, heading for the cellar. The crowd waited in tense silence until, minutes later, one of the men emerged, his face pale. "It's like she said, Sheriff," he reported. "There's a body down there. It looks like it's been dead for years, all withered up and behind a broken wall. There's children's bones, sir. Lots of 'em." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by cries of horror and dismay. The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice gentler now, "I think you'd better come with me. We'll need to sort this out properly." Eleanor allowed herself to be led away from the house, casting one last glance over her shoulder at the place that had briefly been her home. In a second-floor window she thought she saw a flicker of movement, a small, pale face watching her departure. But when she blinked, it was gone. The following days passed in a blur. Eleanor told her story repeatedly to the sheriff, to a judge from the county seat, to doctors who examined her for signs of trauma or delusion. She omitted certain details: the ghostly children, the voices in the walls, Benjamin's final message about her father. Some truths, she decided, were hers alone to keep. The remains found in the cellar wall were eventually identified as belonging to children who had disappeared from Millbrook, and surrounding communities between 1761 and 1762. They were given a proper burial in the town cemetery, with Reverend Wilson presiding over the somber ceremony. The withered corpse found near the stone table proved more puzzling to the authorities. By all medical assessments, it appeared to be the body of Dr. Thomas Blackwood, yet in a state of desiccation that would normally take decades to achieve. The official report eventually concluded that Dr. Blackwood had succumbed to an unknown wasting disease, perhaps explaining his strange behavior in his final days. As for Eleanor, she was placed in the care of Reverend Wilson and his wife, a kindly woman who treated the orphaned girl with gentle compassion. The town, shaken by the revelations of its dark history, rallied around her. The same people who had avoided her gaze now brought gifts of food and clothing, offered words of sympathy, invited her to social gatherings. Eleanor accepted their belated kindness with grace, but she never fully trusted Millbrook or its inhabitants again. She knew too well how easily they had turned a blind eye to evil, how readily they had sacrificed the vulnerable to protect their own comfort and safety. On the 1-month anniversary of what the town now called the Thornhouse incident, Eleanor visited the cemetery alone. She laid wildflowers on the fresh grave that held the remains of Jonathan Thorne's victims, then wandered among the older tombstones until she found the one marked William Porter, 1807 to 1817, beloved son. "I know you're not here," she said softly to the empty grave, "but I wanted to thank you anyway for warning me, for helping me understand." The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees, sending a shower of crimson leaves spiraling to the ground. Eleanor took it as answer enough. As she turned to leave, she noticed a man standing at the cemetery gates, a stranger, well-dressed, with kind eyes and a document case under his arm. He approached her with a respectful nod. "Miss Eleanor Blackwood?" he inquired. When she nodded cautiously, he continued, "My name is James Harrington. I represent the law firm of Harrington & Sons in Boston. I've been searching for you for some time." "Why would a Boston lawyer be looking for me?" Eleanor asked. "It concerns your late mother's family," Mr. Harrington explained. "Your maternal grandmother, Mrs. Catherine Pierce, passed away 3 months ago. In her will, she left her entire estate to you, her only grandchild." Eleanor stared at him in shock. "I never knew my grandparents. My mother said they disowned her when she married my father." "That is unfortunately true," the lawyer acknowledged. "However, your grandmother regretted that decision in her final years and altered her will accordingly. You are now the owner of a substantial property in Salem, Massachusetts, along with a considerable fortune." He handed her a sealed envelope. "This letter explains everything. Should you choose to accept the inheritance, I am authorized to escort you to Salem at your earliest convenience." Eleanor took the envelope, her mind reeling with possibilities. A new home, far from Millbrook, a chance to start again. "I'll need some time to consider," she said, though in her heart the decision was already made. Mr. Harrington bowed slightly. "Of course. I'll be staying at the Millbrook Inn until Friday. You can reach me there when you've decided." As the lawyer departed, Eleanor opened the envelope and began to read her grandmother's letter, a missive full of regret for past mistakes and hope for Eleanor's future. But what caught her attention was a particular passage near the end. "The Pierce women have always possessed certain gifts, insights, and sensitivities that others lack. Your mother had them, though she denied their existence. I suspect you may have inherited these abilities as well. If so, you will find the library at Pierce Manor most enlightening. There are volumes there that have been in our family for generations, knowledge passed down from mother to daughter since before the founding of this country. This legacy is now yours, Eleanor. Use it wisely, and perhaps in time you will understand why certain dark forces have always been drawn to our bloodline, and how we have learned to defend ourselves against them." Eleanor folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. As she walked back toward the Reverend's house, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Jonathan Thorne had been right about one thing: she did possess a gift, but it wasn't meant for his twisted purposes. In Salem, perhaps she would find answers about who and what she truly was. And maybe, just maybe, she would discover a way to ensure that no one else would ever suffer at the hands of monsters who wore human faces. The journey to Salem took 3 days by train and coach, through autumn-painted landscapes that grew increasingly familiar to Eleanor as they approached the coast, though she had never visited her mother's hometown. Something about the rocky shores and salt-tinged air sparked a sense of recognition deep within her, as if her blood remembered what her mind could not. Mr. Harrington proved a respectful traveling companion, offering conversation when Eleanor seemed receptive and silence when she turned inward. Lost in thoughts of all that had happened and all that might lie ahead, Pierce Manor stood on a hill overlooking Salem Harbor, a stately Federal-style home built of weathered brick, with tall windows and a widow's walk that offered views of the Atlantic. As their carriage approached up the long, tree-lined drive, Eleanor felt a curious sensation, like invisible hands gently welcoming her home. Your grandmother lived here alone for the past 20 years with only a small staff to attend to her needs, Mr. Harrington explained as he helped Eleanor from the carriage. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, has remained to assist you in your transition. Should you wish to retain her services, of course. Eleanor nodded, her attention captured by the imposing front door, which bore an unusual bronze knocker in the shape of a woman's hand holding an apple. An old family symbol, Mr. Harrington noted, following her gaze. Knowledge and discernment, I believe Mrs. Pierce once told me. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that assessed Eleanor thoroughly before, softening with something like recognition. Miss Blackwood, she said, her voice surprisingly warm given her austere appearance. Or should I say Miss Pierce now? I'm Mrs. Winters. I served your grandmother for 30 years, and your great-grandmother before her. She stepped aside to allow them entry. Welcome home. The interior of Pierce Manor was both grand and intimate, high ceilings and elegant furnishings balanced by comfortable chairs drawn close to fireplaces and windows with cushioned seats that invited one to linger. It felt, Eleanor thought, like a home designed by someone who appreciated beauty but valued comfort more. Your room has been prepared, Mrs. Winters informed her. The rose room, it was your mother's when she was a girl. Thank you, Eleanor said, suddenly overwhelmed by the connection to the mother she had lost years ago. I think I'd like to rest a while before dinner, if that's acceptable. Of course, Mrs. Winters agreed. I'll have tea sent up, Mr. Harrington, if you'll follow me. We can discuss the final details in the study. Eleanor's room was on the second floor, a spacious chamber with windows facing the sea. The walls were papered in a pattern of faded roses, and the furniture was delicately carved cherry wood, including a four-poster bed with embroidered hangings. On the nightstand sat a framed daguerreotype of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Eleanor's mother, her grandmother as a girl, perhaps. After the maid delivered tea and departed, Eleanor explored the room more thoroughly. In the wardrobe she found dresses that had been altered to fit her measurements, Mrs. Winters's work, no doubt. The bookshelf contained volumes her mother had cherished in her youth, poetry, novels, and several leather-bound journals. Eleanor selected one of the journals at random and settled by the window to read. The handwriting inside matched that of the letter her grandmother had sent, elegant but practical, with flourishes only on capital letters. October 3rd, 1832, Catherine's gift manifested today. I found her in the garden speaking to nothing, or so I thought, until she described with perfect accuracy the appearance of my own mother, dead these 15 years. She even knew details about the cameo mother always wore, which Catherine could not possibly have seen in portraits or photographs. The bloodline continues as it must. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she turned the page. October 10th, 1832. I have begun Catherine's education today, starting with the simplest protections. She learns quickly, as I did at her age. By Samhain she should be ready for her first viewing of the family grimoire, though not, of course, the forbidden sections. Those must wait until she is at least 16, when her mind can comprehend the dangers without being consumed by them. A family grimoire? Eleanor's thoughts flashed to the terrible book she had destroyed in the Thornhouse cellar. Was her family's tome similar in nature? The idea disturbed her deeply. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reading. Mrs. Winters entered with a fresh pot of tea and a plate of small cakes. I thought you might be hungry after your journey, the housekeeper said, setting the tray on a small table. She glanced at the journal in Eleanor's hands. I see you've found your grandmother's diaries. Yes, Eleanor said, closing the book carefully. Eggs lookin', goes at dot, illuminating. Mrs. Winters's expression was knowing. Your grandmother hoped they would be. She wanted you to understand your heritage gradually rather than all at once. She poured a cup of tea and handed it to Eleanor. There will be time for questions later. For now, rest. Dinner will be served at 7. After the housekeeper departed, Eleanor returned to the journal, skimming entries until one caught her eye. March 5, 1844. Catherine asked today about the Thorn incident, having found references to it in the older journals. I explained, as much as was appropriate for her age, that some men seek power through darkness rather than light, and that our family has sometimes been targeted for our gifts. I did not tell her how close Jonathan Thorn came to capturing my great-aunt Eliza, nor how Eliza's sacrifice saved our bloodline from corruption. Those stories must wait until Catherine is older and can understand the price of power. Eleanor nearly dropped the journal. Jonathan Thorn had targeted her family before. Was that why he had fixated on her, not because of random chance, but because of some ancient grudge or desire for the Pierce family's abilities? She read on, hungry for answers, but the entries became more mundane after that, detailing Catherine's education, social engagements, and everyday life in Salem. It wasn't until the final pages that Eleanor found another reference to her family's abilities. June 21st, 1850. Catherine's training is complete. Today, on the summer solstice, I presented her with the key to the library's hidden chamber and officially transferred guardianship of the grimoire to her keeping. She is the youngest Pierce woman to assume the responsibility in 4 generations, but circumstances demand it. My health fails, and I must ensure the knowledge is preserved. May she use it wisely, and remember always, our power comes not from dominion over death, but from respect for the natural order. We do not command, we commune, we do not bind, we release. This is the true legacy of the Pierce women, despite what others may believe. Eleanor closed the journal, her mind racing with questions. A hidden chamber in the library? A key? And what did her great-grandmother mean by commune rather than command? That evening, after a quiet dinner with Mr. Harrington, during which they discussed the practical aspects of her inheritance, Eleanor approached Mrs. Winters privately. "The library," she said without preamble. "I'd like to see it tonight." Mrs. Winters studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Your grandmother said you would know when you were ready. Follow me." The library occupied the entire east wing of the house's first floor, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, rolling ladders, and reading nooks tucked between windows that would catch the morning light. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface bare except for a single wooden box. Mrs. Winters gestured toward the box. "Your grandmother left this for you. Inside is the key she wanted you to have, along with instructions." She moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to it. Some journeys must be taken alone." When the door closed behind the housekeeper, Eleanor approached the desk and opened the box. Inside lay a silver key, unlike any she had seen before, its shaft twisted into a spiral, its head formed into the shape of a woman's hand, echoing the doorknocker's design. Beneath it was a folded letter sealed with wax and pressed with the same symbol. Eleanor broke the seal and unfolded the letter, revealing her grandmother's now familiar handwriting. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I am gone from this world and you have come to claim your birthright. I regret deeply that I never knew you in life, a consequence of my pride and stubbornness, which cost me my daughter and for many years the knowledge of your existence. When I finally learned of you, it was through dreams, vivid visions of a young girl with my daughter's eyes and the Pierce gift strong within her. I saw, too, the shadow that has hunted our family for generations, Jonathan Thorne, or whatever name he uses in your time. By now you have likely encountered him. If you are reading this, you have survived that encounter, though doubtless at great cost. For this I am profoundly sorry. Each generation of Pierce women has faced this trial, this testing of our abilities against one who would corrupt them for his own ends. The key enclosed will open the hidden chamber behind the east bookcase, the one containing the complete works of Nathaniel Hawthorne, a distant relation, though he never acknowledged the connection. Pull the 3rd volume of Twice-Told Tales halfway out, and the mechanism will reveal itself. Within the chamber you will find the true history of our family, dating back to the Salem witch trials and beyond. You will find, too, the grimoire, not a book of spells as common superstition would have it, but a record of our communion with those who have passed beyond the veil. This is our gift, not to command the dead as Jonathan Thorne sought to do, but to communicate with them, to learn from them, to help them find peace when they are troubled. Use this knowledge wisely, Eleanor. The gift can be a burden if allowed to consume you, or a blessing if approached with humility and respect for the natural order. You are the last of the Pierce line. With you, our family's story may end, or it may take a new direction. The choice, as it has always been, is yours. With love and faith in your strength, Catherine Pierce Eleanor read the letter twice more, letting its implications sink in. Then, with steady hands, she took the key and approached the bookcase containing the works of Hawthorne. The 3rd volume of Twice-Told Tales slid out easily at her touch, revealing a small keyhole hidden behind it. The silver key fit perfectly. When Eleanor turned it, a soft click echoed through the library, and a section of the bookcase swung inward, revealing a small chamber beyond. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped through the doorway into her inheritance and her destiny. The hidden chamber was smaller than Eleanor had expected, perhaps 15 feet square, with no windows and only a single oil lamp hanging from the ceiling to provide illumination. Unlike the rest of the house, which was furnished with comfort and elegance in mind, this room was purely functional. Stone walls, a simple wooden table and chair, and shelves lining 3 walls, filled with books, jars, and boxes of various sizes. In the center of the table lay a large book bound in deep blue leather, its cover unmarked save for a silver embossing of the now familiar hand and apple symbol. Beside it stood a small silver bell and a clear crystal bowl filled with water. Eleanor approached cautiously, remembering all too well the grimoire she had destroyed in the Thorn House cellar. Quote, but as she drew near, she felt none of the malevolence that had emanated from Jonathan Thorn's book. Instead, the Pierce grimoire seemed to radiate a gentle warmth, almost like a welcome. With careful hands, Eleanor opened the cover. The first page bore a simple inscription in faded ink: The Record of the Pierce Women, begun by Elizabeth Pierce, 1693, continued by her daughter's daughters. Eleanor turned the page and found herself looking at an account of the Salem witch trials, written in a cramped, urgent hand. I write this in secrecy and haste, for today my mother, Rebecca Pierce, was accused of witchcraft by Abigail Williams. The girl claims that Mother's spirit came to her in the night and tormented her with visions of the dead. There is a terrible irony in this accusation, for while Mother does indeed possess the ability to see and speak with those who have passed beyond, she has only ever used this gift to bring comfort to the bereaved and peace to troubled souls. Mother instructed me to flee Salem should she be arrested, taking with me her journals and the knowledge she has passed down. She pressed into my hand the key to Grandmother's secret chamber and made me swear an oath that I would preserve our family's legacy and ensure that our gift was never used for darkness. I made this vow, though it broke my heart to leave her to face her accusers alone. Tonight I depart for Boston, where Mother's cousin will shelter me until the madness in Salem has passed. I pray daily for Mother's deliverance, though my dreams tell me I shall not see her again in this life. The account continued, describing Elizabeth's flight from Salem, her eventual marriage, and her return years later to build Pierce Manor on land that had been in her family since before the witch trials. Throughout the narrative ran a common thread: the Pierce women's ability to communicate with the dead, and their commitment to using this gift honorably. Eleanor read on, becoming so absorbed in the family history that she lost track of time. Generation after generation of Pierce women had recorded their experiences, their methods for honing their abilities, and their encounters with those who sought to exploit their gift for darker purposes. It was in the entries from the mid-10th century that Eleanor finally found mention of Jonathan Thorn, June 10, 1760. Today I met a most disturbing gentleman at the Hollowells' summer gathering. Dr. Jonathan Thorn introduced himself as a natural philosopher with interests in the spiritual realm. His questions about local legends and superstitions seemed innocent enough, but there was a hunger in his eyes when he spoke of communication with the dead that set my nerves on edge. I made excuses to avoid a private conversation with him, though he pressed most insistently for an invitation to call at Pierce Manor. Something tells me to be wary of this man. Subsequent entries documented Thorn's increasing interest in Eliza Pierce, the writer's daughter, who had begun to show signs of exceptional ability even at her young age. The mother's concern grew as Thorn maneuvered himself into Salem society, gaining the trust of influential families and establishing a reputation as a man of science and reason. December 5, 1760, Dr. Thorn called again today, bringing gifts for Eliza's silver locket and books on natural philosophy suitable for a girl of her obvious intelligence. I cannot forbid these visits without arousing suspicion, as he has become a welcome guest in every home in Salem. But I have instructed Eliza never to be alone with him, and I have placed protections around her room and throughout the house. The silver bell Grandmother left me now stands ready on my bedside table. Should Thorn attempt to enter our home uninvited, its ring will alert me, no matter how deeply I sleep. The water bowl in Eliza's room has been prepared with the herbs Grandmother specified. Any malevolent intent directed toward my daughter will cause the water to turn black, warning her of danger. Eleanor's eyes darted to the silver bell and crystal bowl on the table before her. The same protections passed down through generations. The entries grew more urgent over the following months as Thorn's true nature and intentions gradually revealed themselves. March 21, 1761. Disaster nearly struck tonight. I awoke to the sound of the silver bell, though it had not been touched by human hands. Racing to Eliza's room, I found the water in her bowl black as pitch and the window open, though I had closed and locked it myself before retiring. Outside, in the garden below, stood Jonathan Thorn, his face upturned toward my daughter's window, lips moving in some silent incantation. When he saw me at the window, the mask of gentility dropped from his features, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. "She is meant for greater things than you can imagine," he called to me, his voice carrying unnaturally through the night air. The Pierce gift wasted on comforting grieving widows and finding lost trinkets. With her power and my knowledge, we could command armies of the dead. I have doubled the protections around the house and sent word to my cousins in Boston. We must leave Salem immediately. Thorn's power and influence here have grown too great to oppose directly. The final entry in that hand was dated April 3, 1761, We depart for Boston at first light. All is arranged. The house will be shuttered, our most valuable possessions and books sent ahead. Yet I fear it may already be too late. Eliza has been strange these past days, distracted, speaking in whispers to herself, drawing symbols I do not recognize. When I questioned her, she claimed not to remember doing these things. I fear Thorn has already established some connection with her, some influence that physical distance may not sever. If the worst should happen, I have prepared a last resort, the ritual grandmother described in her most secret writings. The price is terrible, but should Thorn succeed in taking my daughter, it may be the only way to free her spirit from his control and end his threat to our bloodline. May God forgive me for even contemplating such measures, and may he grant that they never become necessary. The handwriting changed after that entry, becoming more youthful and less controlled, Eleanor assumed. But something was wrong. The narrative was disjointed, the sentences fragmentary, as if the writer was struggling to maintain coherent thought. April 4th, mother left before dawn. Says we go to Boston. Safety there. But he calls to me. In dreams. In waking moments. His voice inside my head, getting stronger. Says I am meant for greatness. Says the dead will bow to us. Us. Not just him now. Us. April 5th, fighting his voice, trying to remember what mother taught. The dead are not servants. They are souls in transition. We help, not command, but his way offers power. So much power. No, this is not me thinking. This is him. Get out, get out, get out. April 6th, he found us on the road. Mother tried to fight. Her protections failed. He was prepared. Had objects belonging to our ancestors, used them to break her wards. He took me. We ride south now to his house in Massachusetts. A special cellar, he says, prepared for me. The entry stopped there, leaving Eleanor to wonder what had happened to Eliza. Had she suffered the same fate as the children whose remains she had found behind the wall in the Thorn house? Had she become one of his experiments? Another victim in his centuries-long quest for power over death? But a few pages later, a new entry appeared, once again in the mother's handwriting, now shaky and aged. October 31st, 1761. It is done. The price is paid. My Eliza is free, though not as I had hoped. Thorn's body is destroyed, though I fear his spirit remains, seeking a new vessel. The ritual worked, but, oh, the cost. My daughter's life. My own sanity, nearly. But she died free of his influence, her soul untainted by his darkness. And with her final breath, she began his undoing. I have placed Eliza's locket, the one Thorn gave her, not knowing I had blessed it with our family's protections, in the hidden compartment beneath this chamber's floor. Should Thorn's spirit ever regain strength and seek out another Pierce woman, the locket will serve as both warning and weapon. It contains a piece of Eliza's spirit, freely given in her final moments, and the touch of such pure sacrifice is anathema to one such as Thorn. I am old now, though it has been only months since I lost my daughter. Grief has aged me beyond my years. I will likely not live to see the next spring. But I have written down everything, the ritual, the protections, the truth about Jonathan Thorn and his ambitions. Knowledge is the greatest weapon I can leave to those who come after me. May God grant that no Pierce woman ever needs to use it. Eleanor sat back, her mind reeling with this new knowledge. Jonathan Thorn had been hunting her family for centuries. Drawn to their ability to communicate with the dead-ant ability he sought to corrupt and exploit for his own purposes. And yet, according to the grimoire, the Pierce women had never used their gift as Thorn did. They had respected the dead, helped them, communed with them as equals rather than binding them as servants. The fundamental difference, Eleanor realized, was one of relationship, partnership versus domination, respect versus exploitation. She thought of the voices behind the wall in the Thorn house cellar, the plea for help, the children trapped between worlds, and she thought of William Benjamin, who had warned her, helped her, even as his spirit was bound by Thorn's dark magic. With sudden decision, Eleanor moved to the center of the room and knelt, running her fingers along the edge of the stone floor until she found a slight depression. When she pressed it, a small section of flooring slid aside, revealing a compartment containing a silver locket identical to the one she had found in the Thorn house cellar. She lifted it carefully, feeling a gentle warmth emanating from the metal. Unlike the locket in Millbrook, which had contained William Benjamin's portrait, this one held a miniature painting of a young woman with dark hair and serious eyes, Eliza Pierce, presumably. As Eleanor held the locket, a sense of calm purpose washed over her. The pieces were finally falling into place. She wasn't merely a random victim of Jonathan Thorn's schemes. She was the latest in a long line of women he had targeted for their unique abilities. And now, As the last of the Pierce line, it fell to her to ensure he never returned to threaten another generation. Eleanor spent the rest of the night reading the grimoire, learning the methods her ancestors had used to communicate with the dead and to protect themselves from those who would exploit their gift. Unlike Thorne's dark rituals, which relied on blood sacrifice and binding magic, the Pierce women's practices were based on mutual respect and freely given consent. The silver bell, she learned, could call spirits who wished to communicate. The crystal bowl of water served both as protection and as a medium through which the dead could sometimes show images from their past or present state. Other tools and techniques filled the grimoire's pages, each designed to facilitate honest communion rather than forced servitude. As dawn approached, Eleanor came to the final pages of the grimoire, blank sheets awaiting the record of her own experiences. With a steady hand, she dipped a pen in ink and began to write. November 15, 1887. I, Eleanor Blackwood Pierce, have today claimed my inheritance and my responsibility as the last of the Pierce line. Though I never knew my mother's family in life, I now understand the gift that flows through my blood and the duty that comes with it. Jonathan Thorne is gone, his physical form destroyed, his grimoire burned, his hold over the spirits he enslaved broken. Yet I cannot be certain his malevolence has been permanently defeated. If my ancestors' experiences are any indication, such evil rarely disappears completely. Therefore, I commit myself to learning all that this grimoire contains, to honoring the Pierce legacy of respect for the dead, and to remaining vigilant against any sign of Thorne's return in my lifetime or beyond. She closed the book gently and returned it to its place on the table. Then, fastening Eliza's locket around her neck, Eleanor extinguished the lamp and left the hidden chamber, closing the secret door behind her. In the main library, pale morning light streamed through the east-facing windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Eleanor stood for a moment, feeling the weight of her newfound knowledge and responsibility. Then, squaring her shoulders, she went to find Mrs. Winters and begin her first full day as mistress of Pierce Manor. 5 years later, October 31st, 1892, the autumn wind swept dead leaves across the grounds of Pierce Manor, their rustling a counterpoint to the waves crashing against the rocky shore below. Eleanor Pierce, now 22, stood at the window of her study, watching as twilight descended over Salem. "All is prepared for tonight, Miss Pierce," Mrs. Winters said from the doorway. Though her hair had grown whiter and her steps slower over the past 5 years, the housekeeper remained a steadfast presence in Eleanor's life, part servant, part confidant, part surrogate mother. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters," Eleanor replied, turning from the window. "And the guests? Beginning to arrive? Mr. Sullivan is showing them to the parlor." Eleanor nodded, smoothing the skirt of her dark green gown. "I'll be down shortly." When Mrs. Winters had gone, Eleanor moved to her dressing table and opened a small wooden box. Inside lay 2 items: the silver locket containing Eliza Pierce's portrait, which she wore on all significant occasions, and a folded letter that had arrived the previous week from Millbrook, Massachusetts. She unfolded the letter, though she had memorized its contents days ago. "Dear Miss Pierce, I hope this letter finds you well. It has been some years since the unfortunate events that led to your departure from our town, but recent occurrences have prompted me to contact you. 3 days ago, a man arrived in Millbrook inquiring after the old Thorne house. He gave his name as Dr. James Crawford and claimed to be a historian researching New England architecture. However, something in his manner, particularly his interest in the cellar of the house and in the local legends about its former occupants, raised concerns among those of us who remember the truth of what happened there. When shown a daguerreotype of Dr. Thomas Blackwood, your father, several townspeople remarked on a striking resemblance between him and this Dr. Crawford, though Crawford appears to be much younger, perhaps 30 to your father's 45. Given what you shared with me about Jonathan Thorne's methods before you left Millbrook, I felt compelled to warn you. If my concerns are unfounded, I apologize for disturbing your peace. If not, may God grant you strength for whatever lies ahead. With deepest respect, Reverend Samuel Wilson. Eleanor returned the letter to its box and fastened the locket around her neck. 5 years of study, of communion with the dead, of strengthening her abilities and her defenses had prepared her for this moment. If Jonathan Thorne had indeed found a new vessel, this Dr. Crawford, and was once again seeking her out, she would be ready. But first, there was the gathering downstairs to attend to. On this Samhain night, as her ancestors had done for generations, Eleanor had invited those in Salem who had recently lost loved ones to Pierce Manor. There, in the softly lit parlor, she would offer them what comfort she could, a message from beyond, a moment of connection, a chance for closure. This was the true purpose of the Pierce gift, Eleanor had come to understand. Not power, not control, but healing. In using her abilities this way, she honored both the living and the dead, maintaining the balance that Jonathan Thorne had sought to corrupt. The parlor was full when Eleanor entered, perhaps 20 people seated in a circle, their faces bearing the unmistakable marks of grief and hope. At the center of the circle stood a small table draped in dark blue cloth, bearing the silver bell and crystal bowl from the hidden chamber. "Good evening," Eleanor said softly, taking her place at the table. "Thank you all for coming. On this night, when the veil between worlds grows thin, we gather to reach across that divide, not to disturb those who have passed, but to reassure ourselves that they are not truly gone from us." She explained the process simply. She would ring the bell, inviting spirits who wish to communicate to draw near. Those present should think of their departed loved ones, holding their names and faces in their hearts. Eleanor would then serve as a conduit, relaying messages or impressions she received. "I cannot promise that every spirit will choose to speak," she cautioned. "Just as in life, they have their own will in death. But I offer my gift as a bridge, should they wish to cross it." One by one, the bereaved shared the names of those they had lost: a husband taken by influenza, a child drowned in a summer accident, a sister lost in childbirth. Eleanor listened with compassion, noting each name, each relationship, each unresolved grief. When all had spoken, she rang the silver bell. Its clear tones seemed to linger in the air longer than natural acoustics would allow, vibrating at the edge of perception. Eleanor closed her eyes, extending her awareness beyond the physical room, into the space where spirits dwelled. They came gradually, first as impressions, then as clearer presences. Not all the named dead appeared, but many did, drawn by the love of those who remembered them and by Eleanor's gift for bridging the worlds. For the next 2 hours, Eleanor relayed messages: a husband's pride in how his wife had managed their business since his passing, a child's assurance that she felt no pain in her final moments, a sister's joy at meeting the niece who had survived the birth that claimed her own life. There were tears in the parlor, not only of grief but of relief, of connection renewed, of burdens lightened. This, Eleanor knew, was what set the Pierce women apart from those like Jonathan Thorne. They used their gift to heal, not to control, to reconnect, not to bind. As the session drew to a close, Eleanor felt a familiar weariness settling into her bones. Communing with the dead demanded much of her energy, and a gathering of this size would leave her drained for days. But the gratitude in the eyes of those she had helped made the sacrifice worthwhile. After the last guest had departed, with Mrs. Winters showing them out, Eleanor remained in the parlor, too exhausted to climb the stairs to her bedroom just yet. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closed, allowing the quiet to envelop her. "Quite an impressive performance, Miss Pierce. Or should I call you Miss Blackwood?" Eleanor's eyes snapped open. A man stood in the doorway, a stranger with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in an expensive suit. His face was handsome in a conventional way, but his eyes were wrong somehow, too old for his youthful features, too knowing. "Dr. Crawford, I presume," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her hand moved to the locket at her throat, drawing comfort from its warmth. The man smiled, showing too many teeth. "For now, yes. James Crawford suits my purposes. Though you and I both know that names are transient things, easily changed as circumstances require." He stepped into the parlor, his gaze taking in the silver bell and crystal bowl still on the table. "The Pierce family tools. How quaint. Your ancestors always did prefer simplicity over power, and you always did mistake cruelty for strength." "Jonathan," Eleanor replied, rising to her feet despite her exhaustion. "How did you survive?" "I destroyed your grimoire, freed your captives." "You destroyed a grimoire," Thorne corrected her, moving closer. "One of several I have created over the centuries. As for my physical form, yes, that was most inconvenient. It took time to gather enough strength to influence the living again, to find a suitable vessel." He gestured to his current body. Dr. Crawford was a promising young physician with an interest in spiritualism, so receptive to suggestion, so eager to explore the boundaries between life and death. His mind was easy to overcome. Eleanor's mind raced. She had prepared for this moment, studied the protections her ancestors had used, but she had hoped for more time, more strength. The communion with the dead had left her vulnerable. "Why come here?" she asked, playing for time. "Why reveal yourself to me?" "Because we are inevitable, Eleanor," Thorne said, his voice almost gentle. "Your family and mine bound together through centuries. The Pierce gift and my knowledge together, they could unlock power beyond imagining. Your ancestors were too short-sighted to see it, but you studied her face. You're different. You've seen both sides now. You understand what's possible." "I understand that you're a parasite," Eleanor said, her hand tightening around the locket. Stealing bodies, binding spirits, feeding on others' pain to extend your unnatural life. Thorn's expression hardened. Harsh words from a young woman who just spent 2 hours exploiting her. Connection to the dead for the comfort of strangers. I don't exploit, I invite, I ask. I respect their choice to communicate or remain silent. Eleanor straightened, feeling a surge of certainty. That's what you've never understood, Jonathan. True power doesn't come from domination. It comes from partnership, from mutual respect. Pretty sentiments, Thorn sneered. But they won't save you. Or this house. Or the legacy you've built here. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small object, a vial containing a dark liquid. Do you know what this is? Blood from the cemetery in Millbrook. Blood that seeped into the earth as your father's body withered and died. Your blood, in part. With it I can bind you as easily as I bound those children all those years ago. Eleanor felt a chill run through her, but she stood her ground. You'll find the Pierce women have learned a few things since Eliza's time. Yes. Poor sweet Eliza. Thorn's voice turned mocking. She fought so hard at the end. Her mother's ritual freed her spirit, but it couldn't stop me. Nothing can. We'll see, Eleanor said softly. In one swift motion she rang the silver bell, its tone piercing the air like a physical force. Thorn winced, his hand tightening around the vial. A summons? He laughed. You think the dead will come to your aid against me? I, who have commanded spirits for centuries? Not a summons, Eleanor corrected him, an invitation. And not to all spirits. She touched the locket at her throat, which had begun to glow with a soft blue light. Just to one. The temperature in the parlor dropped suddenly, frost forming on the windows despite the fire burning in the grate, and the crystal bowl on the table filled with a swirling mist that spilled over its edges, pooling on the floor between Eleanor and Thorn. From this mist rose a figure, young woman in the dress of the previous century, her features unmistakably similar to the portrait in Eleanor's locket. Eliza. Thorn breathed, his confident demeanor faltering for the first time. "Hello, Jonathan," the spirit said, her voice like wind through autumn leaves. "It's been a long time." "This is impossible," Thorn said, taking a step back. "Your spirit was freed. You passed beyond my reach." "Freed, yes," Eliza agreed, "but not gone. A piece of me remained, willingly given to protect my bloodline." She turned to Eleanor. "My many times great niece, the last of our line, the strongest of us all." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. "I didn't know if it would work, if you would come. On Samhain night, with the veil at its thinnest, with the Pierce gift at its strongest." Eliza's spirit smiled. "I have been waiting for this moment since you first opened the grimoire." She turned back to Thorn, her expression hardening. "You have terrorized my family for too long, Jonathan. Stolen too many lives, bound too many innocent spirits. It ends tonight." Thorn had recovered his composure, his initial shock replaced by calculation. "You are but one spirit, Eliza, and not even fully present in this world. What can you possibly do against me? Alone? Perhaps little," Eliza acknowledged. "But I am not alone." As if on cue, more mist began to seep into the room from under doors, through keyholes between floorboards. From this mist emerged more spirits, women of all ages, their features bearing the unmistakable Pierce family resemblance. Eleanor's grandmother Catherine, her mother, ancestors she knew only from portraits and descriptions in the grimoire. And behind them more spirits still, the children from the wall in Millbrook, now free of their bonds. William Porter's true spirit, all those who had suffered at Jonathan Thorn's hands over the centuries. "You see, Jonathan," Eleanor said, drawing strength from the presence of her ancestors, "this is the true difference between us. You bound spirits against their will, forced them to serve you. We Pierce women have only ever asked, only ever invited. And now, when we need them most, they come freely, out of love and a desire for justice." Thorn looked around wildly, his confidence finally crumbling as he found himself surrounded by the spirits of those he had wronged. He uncorked the vial, preparing to use the blood within for whatever dark ritual he had planned. But before he could speak the words, Eliza's spirit moved forward, passing through the crystal bowl on the table. As she did, the water within turned to a brilliant, blinding light that shot upward in a column, engulfing both Eliza and Thorn. "No!" Thorn screamed, his voice distorting, becoming less human with each syllable. "This body is mine! My work is not complete!" "Your work ends here," Eliza said, her voice echoing with the power of all the Pierce women who had come before. "Your spirit will no longer walk between worlds, Jonathan Thorn. You will no longer steal bodies or bind innocent souls. You will face what comes after, as all must do." The light grew blindingly intense. Eleanor shielded her eyes, hearing Thorn's screams fade into a distant wail, and then to silence. When she could see again, Dr. Crawford's body lay on the floor. The vial of blood shattered beside him, its contents evaporated into nothing. The spirits remained, though their forms were fading as the power of Samhain night began to wane. Eliza approached Eleanor, her spectral hand reaching out to touch the locket. "He is truly gone," Eliza said. "His spirit has passed beyond where he can harm no one else." "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. Not just to Eliza, but to all the spirits who had come to her aid. "All of you." "No, child," her grandmother's spirit said gently. "Thank you. You have ended a cycle of torment that has plagued our family for generations. You have honored the true purpose of our gift." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "To the Pierce legacy? To our gift?" Her mother's spirit stepped forward, her face so like Eleanor's own that it made her heart ache. "That is for you to decide, daughter. You may be the last of our bloodline, but the gift need not end with you. It can be passed to those you choose, those you teach. The grimoire contains the ritual," Eliza added. "A way to share our knowledge, our connection to those beyond the veil, with others who would use it wisely. You could build a new legacy, Eleanor. A fellowship of those who commune with the dead with respect and compassion." Eleanor looked around at the assembled spirits. Her family, her ancestors, all those who had guarded the Pierce gift through centuries of struggle and sacrifice. She thought of the comfort she had brought to grieving families earlier that evening, of the peace she had helped spirits find over the past 5 years. "I will," she promised. "I'll find others with the sensitivity, the compassion needed for this work. I'll teach them what you've taught me. The Pierce legacy will continue, even if the bloodline does not." One by one, the spirits began to fade, offering final words of encouragement and love before returning to their rightful place beyond the veil. Eliza was the last to go, her form lingering until the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows. "Remember, Eleanor," she said, her voice growing fainter. "The dead are not to be feared or controlled, but understood and respected. In this truth lies the real power of our gift." And then she was gone, leaving Eleanor alone in the parlor with Dr. Crawford's unconscious form. The man would live, she knew. Thorne's spirit had been forced out, but the body remained, and with it, the original soul that had been suppressed for so long. As the new day dawned, Eleanor looked out at the grounds of Pierce Manor, at the town of Salem beyond, and at the vast ocean stretching to the horizon. Jonathan Thorne was gone. The children he had bound were free. The long shadow he had cast over the Pierce family had finally been lifted. In the hidden chamber beneath the library, the grimoire awaited her, no longer just a record of the past, but a blueprint for the future she would build. A future where the Pierce gift would continue to bring light to the darkness, comfort to the grieving, and peace to restless spirits. Eleanor touched the locket at her throat one last time, feeling its warmth against her skin, a reminder of all those who had come before her and all those who would come after. Then, with renewed purpose, she went to summon Mrs. Winters and begin the next chapter of the Pierce legacy.